of the red states was a total landslide, and the other one discounts that. So for me, what this means is basically that we don't live in segregated states. We do not live in segregated states, that we live together in a community. And essentially, the differences of opinion, a tenet of the Bill of Rights, are alive and well in this nation. There it is. The last thing I want to close with is this, the Internet map. This is the Internet. It's visualized by pioneering visualizing researchers at Lucent Technology, a man named Stephen Eric. And what he's done is it's Internet traffic flow around the world. He's using a three-dimensional network structure applied to a flat map. For me, its map is new economic geography. I find that I couldn't have done this book without the Internet. I could never have done this book. And if I didn't have colleagues, for example, the one I most must say, my Susan Rayburn, who came into my desk one day and said to me, you know, the web is your friend. It became my mantra. I wrote it on a card and I stuck it on my machine and I said, the web is your friend, Vincent. The web is your friend. And so this one, I must say, brings me right back to where I started. Because again, I think of Miranda in The Tempest. Only now it's a brave new world that has such people in it. Thanks so much. I can't tell you how grateful I am to be here tonight. Thank you. Thanks. My savior has just instructed me that I'm supposed to be introducing Ron, so now I want to introduce you to Ron Grimm, who literally changed my life.
Thank you, Vincent. As I think back over this project, the last 8 years, it's been a real journey for me. I've had the opportunity to look at a lot of maps that I never looked at before when I was using the collections. But tonight I'd like to talk about 3 cartographic items which sort of define high points in my career here at the Library of Congress. John Cole mentioned that back in the 80s we had a symposium on the history of the Atlas. And so the first item I want to talk about grows out of that particular experience. I have here to illustrate the title page to one of the early atlases. It's Abraham Ortelius's Theatrum Orbis Terrarum. It was published in 1570. It's considered one of the landmarks in cartographic history, at least in Western European cartographic history. This was the first book to be published that had maps of a uniform style, and we really call it our first modern atlas. Now, it didn't use the word atlas to define the title. It used a Latin phrase which means theater of the world. And this particular icon really became the framework for the book as we worked on the organization. It implies that the maps that are going to be in this book present a picture of the whole world, and it's a theater. And the architecture of the structure there implies a theater. To me, that equates to the physical earth. And there's human action on that stage. That's the playing out of human history with the various cultures evolving around the world. The maps in the book reflect that changing culture around the world. Now, it's a very ornate depiction here, and for a long time you think, okay, they're just trying to make it pretty, they're trying to sell the book. But if we look at the various figures that are on this map, we find that they represent the world view at that particular time. At the very top is a figure which represents Europe ruling over the rest of the world. And along the sides, exotic Asia and Africa. And at the bottom is a figure which appears to be a savage. That represents the Americas. And next to it is an incomplete figure representing Magellanica. What's Magellanica? That's what Ortelius supposed were the incomplete or the unknown lands at the southern part of the continent, or of the world, representing Antarctica and Australia, not yet discovered, just supposed to be there. Why was this book such a landmark? The 16th century was a real revolution in terms of map making, at least for the Europeans. The printing press had been invented in the late 1400s. The Europeans, basically the Spanish and the Portuguese, had sailed out from the Iberian Peninsula and they started to discover new worlds. The 16th century became a time of combining that information about exploration with the printing press and disseminating that geographical information. This was a time of fantastic growth in geographic information, and how do you present that information to the public? Now, we used that concept for the organization of the book. We start with a chapter on the Mediterranean world, looking at what the Europeans, or the people focused on the Mediterranean, thought about the world up until the period of the late 1400s, the early 1500s. We look at the Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Muslims, the Jewish populations. We looked at all those people who focused on the Mediterranean. Then we look at each one of the three major continents that made up that three-part world: Asia, Africa, and Europe. And we use continents as a construct. Continents are basically referred to large land masses surrounded by water, but it's not a perfect construct, as Vincent pointed out. Europe and Asia are actually part of the same landmass. They become cultural entities. And as we move through the narrative, we start to see other cultural divides. The fourth part of the world is the Americas. North and South America is how we think of them as continents. But we talk about them in a cultural divide. We talk about Anglo-America, basically the area north of the Rio Grande, and Latin America, the area south of the Rio Grande. And then the fifth part of the world, the Magellanica. We looked at Antarctica and Australia and the Pacific Islands. Now, two other items that I want to talk about are represented by the dust jacket and the cover of the book. On the dust jacket, we see this map, a very colorful map. It's basically of South Africa and Mozambique. It comes from an atlas that was compiled in 1630. It's a manuscript atlas done by the Portuguese. In fact, it's called the Secret Atlas of the Portuguese Discoveries. 1630, the Portuguese Empire is beginning to wane. It's not the powerful empire it was during the 1500s. But this atlas documents the Portuguese discoveries and colonization around the world. Now, interestingly, the Portuguese and the Spanish didn't share their information very easily with the rest of the world. They didn't share it with the other European countries. But in the late 1600s, this atlas was stolen by the Spanish. And there's some interesting little annotations in the atlas that reflect that provenance of this particular volume. As you probably all recall, as the colonies, or as the empires tried to establish their claims in the New World, in 1493 the Pope said, I'm going to draw a line of demarcation. The areas to the west will be Spanish, the areas to the east will be Portuguese. And on this particular, is that the right map? Yes. Okay. The line of demarcation and puts most of Brazil in